All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon from New York City. I am Victoria Bajer. I work at the Consulate General of Denmark in New York, and I'm part of the organizing team behind this new three-part webinar series, The Gender Effect at Work, where we invite influential speakers from the Nordics and United States to discuss this important agenda. Now, today we will discuss, and during this, it's our second webinar, Funding the Next Female Unicorn, Financing and Promoting Female Entrepreneurship, which I'm personally myself very passionate about. Today we'll look and share insights on how to improve the gender balance in the startup ecosystem and funding structures. Now, before we get started, this is a Nordic webinar co-hosted and organized by the Consulates General of Denmark and Sweden in New York in partnership with New York City Economic Development Corporation. It's in collaboration with the consulates of Finland, Iceland, and Norway in New York. Most importantly, we are very grateful for the support we have received by the Nordic Council of Ministers to power this webinar series. So here we have the beautiful logos of everyone. A couple of practical notes before we get started today. First of all, we are recording. Second, your lines have been muted and your video turned off. It will only be the moderator and panelists who have the camera on. So sorry about that, even though you're smiling behind your screens, we can't see it. Finally, we have, in the end, an open session where we invite you to, in the chat function, to submit all your questions for our panels. As we go along, please simply submit them, and they will be moderated, and we'll take as many questions as we are able to. Today's agenda: a couple of welcoming remarks or welcome notes. Then we have the pleasure of Annika Rempe, who will provide the opening remarks for this session. Then we'll have our moderator, Lauren Nadres, to introduce our panelists and give them a 5-question to begin with. We'll move into the roundtable discussion where we'll have 5 brilliant speakers today. And then in the end, we'll have an open Q&A where we'll take all of your questions. Finally, we'll go through the next webinar at the end. Now, to begin, Annika Rempe is the Consul General of Sweden in New York. And we have the honor of having her today. Annika, if we have the unmute, then I'm sure you have a couple of things to say.
Thank you, Victoria, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Well, entrepreneurship is, you could always say, the engine of our economies. It spurs job creation, it spurs innovation, and it disrupts markets with new inventions, new ideas, and that very often improve our societies, the capacity of our societies. Products and technologies raise our living standards and contributes to the development of our society. So entrepreneurship is extremely important to all of us. Some of the entrepreneurs that we see today will be the leaders of tomorrow. Just as we've seen the big companies today coming out of ideas maybe 20 or 100 years ago. Many of the entrepreneurs today are women. However, studies show that women are still in minority. Entrepreneurs are predominantly men. And worldwide, women account for little over 10% of the entrepreneurial activity. So despite all the strides, all the activities to encourage female entrepreneurship, there is still a long way to go. The gap is still there. And the number one barrier being told in many surveys is, of course, lack of funding. In fact, twice as many women than men would say that it's the lack of funding that would stop them from starting their own businesses. New York City is home of one of the largest concentrations of women-owned businesses in the US. And this is, of course, vital to the economy of the city. And I'm sure we will hear more about that later. And similarly, in the Nordics, countries with strong reputation of gender equality, there are many female business leaders. However, again, studies show that despite all the efforts to increase the number of female entrepreneurs, there is a gap on both sides of the Atlantic. So why is this, and how can we change it? Are there inherent biases in the funding structure, in the VC funding structure, where men are considered more brave and women more cautious, where actually women are viewed upon through a different lens? And how can we level out the playing field in the startup ecosystem? What can we learn from each other? How can we possibly find joint collaboration in order to really strengthen the system? And what can we do for joint action? Because we all know there is room for improvement here. And so I believe that these are some of the very important topics that we will cover today. And I look very much forward to listen to our interesting speakers. I do hope we will come out with new steps, new actions, hopefully at least a good sharing of ideas. And I just wish you all a interesting and good conversation. Thank you to our listeners. I really would like to say thank you for tuning in, taking your time out of your agendas, and we hope we will bring something back to you. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much, Annika. First of all, we can hear that you're in New York, that's for sure. Second of all, thank you for highlighting those important points. And I'm sure, and I know our participants today and our panel will discuss this. Before we move on to our panel, I would like to welcome our moderator of today, Lauren Nadres. She is the Assistant Vice President of New York City Economic Development Corporation. Lauren, I'll have to give a couple of words on your background because it's quite impressive, and I know you have recently shared some exciting news about your what the future holds for you. But Lauren, you have 15 years of experience in international economic development, innovation, and entrepreneurship, where you have worked for leading global institutions such as the World Bank, International Finance Corporation, and United Nations. I also know that you have worked at a startup tech company, and you have traveled, 80 countries. You've survived triathlons, and you've even climbed the Mount Everest base camp. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce you and hand over the word to you.
Thanks so much, Victoria. And for that kind of introduction, and also for Consul General Rembe for her excellent opening remarks as well. Sweden and Denmark and other fellow Nordic countries have been such leaders on the gender equity front, and it's a shared value for us in New York City, and one we're continually striving for. We're very fortunate in New York that we've got the largest diplomatic corps in the world, and we're able to do these sessions just, very regularly with our close partners and exchanging, knowledge and expertise and networks and resources. It's really an honor for us at EDC, which is how we fondly call New York City Economic Development Corporation in short, to be co-host and partner in this important initiative on gender effect at work and discussions on solutions in creating a gender inclusive recovery. And same as Victoria, entrepreneurship, women's entrepreneurship and financing is something also very close to my heart. And on behalf of EDC, just our sincere thanks truly to the whole organizing team with the Consul General of Denmark, Sweden and New York, Consul General of Finland, Iceland, Norway, and the Nordics Councils of Ministers. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the powerhouse of Mai Tai women in the background that have been really powering these webinars. So Victoria, Elizabeth, Martine, Annette, and Barbara have been excellent, and I'm quite lucky that there's also such a joy to work with. So what I'll just do is just a quick introduction on EDC, and also share a bit about New York City to date, and then jump right into the Q&A, which I'll give an introduction about our excellent speakers for today. So in brief, for those that might not be familiar, the New York City Economic Development Corporation is a mission-driven nonprofit organization that functions as the primary city agency that promotes and implements economic development. And we aim to create shared prosperity across New York City. Inclusion and equity, as Diana, my colleague at the Small Business Services would know, is very much in the anchors everything that we do. Regarding New York City's economy to date, we wouldn't be New York if we don't boast a bit. So pardon me for a minute. There are cities and there's New York City. Its diversity, connectivity, entrepreneurial spirit, and sheer scale make it the center of commerce, culture, and innovation. Despite having been the epicenter of the global pandemic early on, and which, all of us on the line that lived through it will really never forget, we also know and feel that today New York City's economic recovery is pulsating across the city. And as we locals like to say, never bet against New York City. New York City remains a global city where you'll have access to customers, talent pools, networks, and capital resources. And it's a center for VC and FDI. However, with that said, I think one of the things that we're discussing today is that we absolutely have our challenges. The funding for women entrepreneurs is still in the single digits, and frankly, that's quite still paltry numbers. The Nordic countries are considered to be frontrunners when it comes to gender equality, along with high percentage of female business owners. So we are in New York City are really keen to learn from them today as well and beyond. I know you are excited as I am on hearing from our panel of investors and startups and experts today. Let me kick off our Q&A discussion portion with a few positive highlights and to also frame our discussion, if I may. So according to a Crunchbase article in 2019, there were more female-founded unicorns than before. A venture capitalist is Jane VC, which is focused on female founders, stated the following: we're going to invest in an underlooked asset class that is overperforming. And as the article said, let's just have that sink in for a minute. It's not about gender. It's about being a capital-focused operation comprised of investors wanting returns, nothing more, nothing less. With that said, let us jump right in. And we're going to start with our first speaker, Jessica Schultz. So, hey, welcome, Jessica. I'll just share a little bit about your amazing bio, if I may. Jessica is a general partner at Nordzone, where her main focus is DTC and consumer internet. Her portfolio includes Redpoints, MattSmart, Outfittery, and many others. Prior to joining Nordzone, Jessica also co-founded or was CMO of market-leading meal kit service HelloFresh, spearheading the global marketing operations. She started a career in consulting and holds a master's in economics and business from Stockholm School of Economics. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
And our first question to you is, you said, you co-founded HelloFresh and such. Can you share some of the experience you had when fundraising as a female entrepreneur? What is your greatest?
Sure. Yes, sure. So we co-founded HelloFresh 10 years ago. So it's been very interesting to see the market first as an entrepreneur and then as an investor. And I think a lot of things have changed in those 10 years, but too little. We went fundraising when I was at HelloFresh was 6 times. So we did 6 different rounds. So I've done a lot of fundraising from the other side. And I think I've pitched to 100 VC funds and we get no from most of them. So kind of a lot of experience and very mixed experience being a female entrepreneur. I think my greatest learning from fundraising was that it is a relationship business. And I always urge entrepreneurs when sitting on this side to start that relationship early and then grow it. Most of us investors invest in people and invest in teams, and we need to get to know people over time. So as we get to know the entrepreneur, it's also the opposite, that the entrepreneur gets to know the investor. And in today's market, most of the entrepreneurs can also choose their investors. So it's also important to be picky from the other side. But I think that was my greatest learning, that it takes time, you develop the relationships, and even though you get no in the first round, you might get a yes in the next round.
That's excellent. I think the highlight on the relationship aspect is very much on point too. Thanks, Jessica. So we're gonna go to our next speaker, Diana Franco, a wonderful colleague of mine in New York City. Ms. Franco is recognized a New York City advocate for women's equality. In the last 3 years, she has led We NYC, Women Entrepreneurs of New York City, the official city's initiative to support women entrepreneurs. During her tenure, We NYC has served over 17,000 women and provided over 28,000 services as of March 2021. Prior to that, she co-founded, she's a serial entrepreneur as well, she co-founded Core Woman, a foundation aiming to empower women economically and professionally. Ms. Franco, a serial entrepreneur by nature, started her career during the internet boom, joining the executive founding team that created and sold 3 successful startups, where she always was the only woman on the table. She has received city awards for excellence in public service and diversity and inclusion. Please welcome Diana.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Now, Diana, New York City has been rated as the #1 place in the world for women entrepreneurs. We NYC, a program that you lead, has been cited as one of the reasons for that. What is it that makes We NYC a unique initiative, and how does diversity and internationalization play into your programs?
Yes, I think there are, I would say like there are several reasons why We NYC is special, but one of them is that it's not the most comprehensive initiative that I've seen for women entrepreneurs, one of the most comprehensive. And the reason I say that is because nowadays We NYC has 4 portfolios with 11 programs under those 4 portfolios. And the diversity of what we, the variety of what we do in those portfolios cover like most of the needs of women entrepreneurs, from creating networks, educational tools or workshops in very specific needs for women entrepreneurs beyond funding, like business skills, self-confidence, well, things like aren't like the usual things that you learn in an entrepreneurship program. We also have access to legal legal support free with the 10 most well-known law firms in the city of New York, and of course funding. We have a full portfolio of funding programs for women entrepreneurs. So I think that's the key. Like we try, I won't say it's perfect, but we really try to cover all the fronts of the needs of women entrepreneurs. And diversity is key. As an initiative, we have done a very intentional effort there. 60% of the women that we have served are women of color, 30% are Latinas, 36% are Black women-owned businesses or women entrepreneurs. And internationalization is the key of what we do, because we really believe innovation comes from the ideas and the different backgrounds of women and all entrepreneurs. So we have identified women from 72 different countries of origin coming through our initiative in the last 3 years.
That's extremely expressive, Diana, and I definitely attest to the comprehensiveness of the program, and I've joined on several of the sessions that you hold. It is very targeted and also just very local and community driven.
Yes, I
Well
think that's
done.
the other, I would say like that's the other key for the program. I was reading once in a study about why government programs fail. And the study says at the end failed because they don't really involve the community, but beyond involving them, it is they didn't create or they failed to create that sense of ownership. And that's what we try to do within WNYC. I have gotten the question of how much is the membership for WNYC? And I'm like, wait, no, this is yours. This is taxpayers' money. This is your initiative. And you need to take advantage of every benefit that you can get in the initiative. So I think that's our other key thing for WNYC. It's like our community is super strong and they really feel that sense of ownership with the initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the feedback that I've heard from entrepreneurs is also it's that it's not only funding, but it's supporting the entrepreneur and every aspect that is needed on that. And I think one of the examples is the legal aspect where you also, this would cost in New York City thousands of dollars just for a 30-minute session in which you've leveraged that partnership, that public-private partnership, in order for entrepreneurs in New York City to access that. So that's great. I'm going to move now to our next speaker, Juha Lehtola, and share a brief introduction of him and the deep expertise he has on the investment front. Juha is heading direct VC investments at Tessi, a Finnish state-owned institutional investor with 1.9 billion euros in assets under management. He serves in the executive management team of Tessi and in the capacity of the VC team leader responsible for managing a portfolio of Finnish high-growth early-stage companies in various tech sectors. Mr. Lehtola joined Tessi in 2009 and has been active in the Finnish and European venture capital ecosystem since 2003 through organizations like the European Investment Fund, EIF, Nordic Venture Partners, and Aura Capital. Juha, you have obviously been active in the Nordic VC landscape for over 15 years and steep in experience in investing. Two questions for you. So one is there have been and still are discussions around the impact of COVID-19 on VC ecosystems and startups. How does Tessi take action to address the funding gaps emerging in the Finnish economy?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and great to be joining this panel. So when COVID became apparent a bit more than a year ago, we kind of pretty quickly adopted this kind of a counter-cyclical approach. So having been traditionally an active investor in the Finnish venture capital scene through co-investment programs for 10 plus years, and also kind of witnessing the tremendous growth, both in terms of investment volumes, but also the quality of startups in general. We were, of course, concerned, just like many investors, other investors around, that what will happen to this ecosystem now when and especially given the fact that the Finnish ecosystem is very much relying on international capital, especially in the later stages. So more than half of the capital into Finnish startups come from international investors. So what we then set up to do is we set up a co-investment program targeting the early stage ambitious VC-backed companies. The investment program is called Venture Bridge, and it is intended for situations where companies have had to delay their fundraising plans and there's existing VC investors already in. So Tessi would join basically the existing syndicate and kind of help these companies carry through the storm, if you will. And now looking back since 1 year with the program, it's of course somewhat surprising that in the end the investment volumes actually did not decline. Quite on the contrary, they doubled in Finland and I guess in other Nordic countries as well. So it's been a kind of a very interesting story. Having said that, I mean, there's still a number of companies that clearly have been affected negatively. So there's the kind of the digital companies that have been faring pretty well and taking in big chunks of capital, but a big group of companies are still suffering. And I think we can already say now that it has given us a very interesting window into also kind of a younger cohort of companies than what we have previously invested in. And you can also actually see some interesting, let's say, diversity related results already emerging out of that.
Okay, that's excellent news. Double, wow. That's very promising. And that you actually, that last comment you have mentioned kind of dives right into the next question perfectly. So from your point of view, Jua, how have these investments or investments in general developed during COVID, which you've addressed? Has it been more inclusive and diverse? And if so, how? Or has it gone the opposite way? From what I hear from you, I think you're actually investing more in a more diverse group. And so maybe you can shed a little bit more deeper light into that if possible.
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, of course, there's so much, let's say, attention and discussion around the whole subject, and people have come to appreciate the importance of it, that, you know, already that kind of says that there has been positive development. If we look at the kind of the numbers, I think it's still a little bit early to judge, at least on a national level or kind of based on statistics, that how has this picture evolved post-COVID in terms of diversity. But if we just look at the small sample of our own portfolio, so kind of pre-COVID, actually, we had a portfolio of 25 companies in the venture space, and there was one that was, let's say, which was founded by a woman, which is like a woman-led business. So 1 out of 25, not a very great percentage, to be honest. Now, looking back 1 year from here, we've made something like 20 investments. So again, because of this program, it has become much more active in terms of investment volumes, at least number-wise. And out of these 20, 2 have been already women-led businesses, and 1 more is kind of in the making. So we are closing that investment. So at least based on this very small sample, there's encouraging signs, and not only in terms of gender diversity, actually as well, because if we look at that, given that this group of companies is slightly earlier stage and very kind of diverse in many ways, also the national diversity aspects are actually developing pretty well in this group. And kind of one conclusion one might draw from that is that adding diversity in one dimension, like nationality, etc., it kind of creates room for diversity in many other dimensions as well.
Excellent, thank you. And if I may, and just kind of curious, I know this is one of the things that's on top of mind of the speakers is, how were you able to, was it that you searched out more women entrepreneurs during that time? Like, how did that, grow a bit from an investor perspective?
To be honest, I would hope to be able to give an answer, something like that. But given that it was more like an inbound type of investment program, it was, I would say, it was more a result of, as I said, the newer generation, the younger generation of entrepreneurs, which we are now exposed to more than we were before, that this kinds of shifts the mix of the portfolio a little bit towards that. But also, if you look at I already gave the statistic in terms of the completed investments, but also if you look at the success rate, so the incoming deal flow from women-led businesses versus the investments that have been completed, so kind of the success rate, that has actually been higher with women-led businesses compared to the other companies. And that's a very kind of important and encouraging sign also in terms of, the overall quality of these proposals.
Right. No, that's excellent. And that's something that we've been hearing quite a bit as well. Thank you, Jua. Next, we have Liva and Stina as our next speaker. I'll read a brief introduction of them and then jump into the question as well. So Liva is the founder of Female Founders of the Future that just launched the Diversity Commitment.com, where investors and matchmakers have formulated and signed common goals for diversity investments in Denmark. It works to make Denmark an even better place to start and scale your own business for all by intentional designing for equality and diversity in collaboration with entrepreneurial ecosystem stakeholders. It is also the creator of the award-winning program Female Founders in Tech, and the report on guide return on diversity, unlocking the untapped potential of gender balance in the startup ecosystem. She has in the past been an external lecturer at Danish Technical University in entrepreneurship, digitization, sustainability, and leadership. In her company, Chedfrem, she has facilitated ungoogleable insights into innovation and entrepreneurship at a high-paced, agile environment in university and corporate startups for more than 500 founders, startups, and scale-up teams. Welcome, Liva. And with
you introduce Stine before we move on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Stine is a co-founder of the female founders of The Future and head of PR and communications there. Stine holds 15 years of experience within PR, branding, and communication from leading global companies. In her current position, Stine is helping startups build strategic narratives and raise awareness towards investors, media, clients, and internal stakeholders. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll jump right in, Liva and Stine, on the female founders of the future and this diversity commitment initiative that you started. So a commitment for the investor ecosystem that has gathered key stakeholders from the Danish investor community together to process and sign goals committed to invest more diverse and achieve fundamental goals within the next few years. Can you tell us a bit more about it and why you took that initiative? And then one thing I'm personally curious about is how are the investors' commitments tracked? We have in the development, we have commitments, and then there's also the actual action after the commitments. I'm curious to know about that as well.
Sure, thanks a lot, Lauren. So first of all, the overall why is resonates with what we've heard here, that the funding invested in women is still single digit, which is something that also the ecosystem would like to change. So there's a lot of goodwill and there are a lot of good numbers now, which is a perfect starting point. But in order to change this and to change these numbers, action needs to be put behind these numbers and this knowledge. And that was the whole idea behind the diversity commitment. And someone needs to take the first steps in order to create this change. And in our conversation with the ecosystem, we detected a lot of goodwill, but also a community that was not totally sure how to proceed with this issue. And one thing that we definitely wanted to do was to gather the community instead of everyone working on this individually. So that was the starting point, to gather the investors to work together on this agenda, where they all know and they all buy into that that we have untapped potential within talent, innovations, return on investment. As you also said yourself, this is lost business potential, and that is also our approach and how we've been talking with the investors. So that was the starting point to support putting action behind the knowledge and the numbers that are out there and that you've also stated today.
And here for this, I could add what we've heard here today. It's a structural issue. One organization cannot solve a structural issue on their own. And that's why we've created this committing community of like-minded stakeholders that are all, codependent. The investment ecosystem is not, one player can do it all by themselves. They all feed into this investment feeding chain. And if one kind of taps out of that, the others are left kind of with what is being invested in prior to that. So it is a codependent ecosystem, and with structural changes, structural actions needs to be taken, and that is why we've taken this committing community approach into the diversity commitment. And as you asked also, Lauren, so what is being measured and tracked? We've launched on 22nd of April, we launched the first signing of the first initial 8 partners. that are both public and private, both investors, early investment matchmakers for the early investments, and later on. So they represent different series stages of investments. And they're all committed to measure and track on gender to start with, within the investment process and within their own organization. So this also includes the deal flow, which is today not documented on gender. And where optional other dimensions of diversity is also being started to be measured, and totally leaned up against the goals that the committing community has formulated together, where Stina and I has facilitated the process of getting to this point. Hope this answers your questions in regard to documentation. We can
absolutely excellent. And frankly, I'm thinking why we don't all have that, and even in our own respective markets. That's excellent, and I love that how you guys are putting action into the numbers and the data, but also I think that ecosystem, the codependence on the ecosystem is really something that is that really strikes a chord with me. And I think that's totally absolutely true. So thank you for that. And that actually kind of delves nicely into for Jessica, having been on both the investor and the entrepreneurship side. North Zone is the European VC fund behind game-changing companies like Spotify, you know, some of us might have heard of, and several other companies. Since 1996, North Zone has backed over 140 companies and raised 8 funds with over 1 billion euros under management. So Jessica, having been on both sides of the table as an entrepreneur and today an investor, what do you believe the solution is and where it lies? Is it with the startups? Is it with investors? Is it both?
Yeah, so I think it's both. And I like what I heard so far, because I think, as we've heard before, no one can do it all. But at Nordson, for example, we think that, you know, be the change you wish to see. So we've really looked closely at what can we do internally. And what I'm really proud of is that we've actually have gender parity in our investment team now on every level. And I think that's such an important thing to look at your own investment team. And we've seen that attracts deal flow from different sectors, different entrepreneurs. As we heard before, we also track gender as one of our metrics for deal flow, so we can actually see how the data changes. But we've also had unconscious bias training internally, and I think that's also very important, because as we see, diversity is broader than just gender, and there are so many structural issues that we're not aware of ourselves. And I think it's very important, having been on both sides, I think you have more empathy for the entrepreneur on the other side, but it also starts with what questions do you ask, what entrepreneurs do you invite for meetings, and so on. So I think we constantly need to develop, but it is something that takes a lot of time. But looking at North Zone, we've seen a big change. So in total, 15% of our deal flow has mixed teams, so very low still. But 25% of our investments in our latest fund have mixed teams. So at least kind of we're getting there. And looking at my own portfolio, 40% have mixed teams. Still not enough, but getting there. So I think that's a lot of things we can do from the investor side. I think from the entrepreneurial side, we need to have role models. So we need to really showcase the successful entrepreneurs and make more talented female potential entrepreneurs want to become entrepreneurs. And I think that's something that we've seen in Sweden that starts working really well now, having someone to look up to. But also what we would like them to do is come and seek us out even earlier. We see a tendency from our entrepreneurs that men, they look for capital very early, and female entrepreneurs, they wait a little bit longer, and we want to change that. What I talked about before is that it's a relationship business, so we want to meet entrepreneurs very, very early. And I think we always urge female entrepreneurs to seek us out, but also for mentorship in the industry, and then get to know a lot of the different investors, which will make it easier to then attract capital when you want to raise your seed round or A round that you come up with.
That's absolutely excellent, Jessica. I think on the investment side, you've hit so much of those points that are common with investment teams. So that's great. I know we've got a lot of women entrepreneurs on the line. If I may, just want to hone in a bit on that, what entrepreneurs can do and basically seeking you out. I know that having worked with women entrepreneurs, there's a bit of a trepidation of, until you're 100% ready, you go to an investor. Can you be a little bit more specific on what point should they come? How early should they come to you? I hear you on the mentorship side. I think working with entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis, it's their thinking is, I don't want to show my vulnerability so much and my development of my business and that thinking, and then share that with an investor, and that might make the investor hedge a bit. What's your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that's a very real kind of feelings out there with entrepreneurs.
I completely agree. And I wouldn't disagree more to that statement, because I think it's the opposite. When I started as an entrepreneur, that was true. And you wanted to wait until you were ready. And then you wanted to have a great metrics to show. Today, we talk to entrepreneurs when they have an idea, when they're thinking about switching. They might be in a career today and they have an idea saying, have you seen anything in this area? Or do you think this vision is big enough? Or is this something you would be interested in? And I love those conversations. And it used to be so hard to reach investors. We would have, I don't know, you couldn't find email addresses or phone numbers. Everything was hidden. Today is the opposite. You can reach us on Twitter or LinkedIn or emails or phone. It's different. And I think investors are much more accessible, or at least that's what I see. And I hope a lot of other investors are as well, but like to seek out those conversations early. So I would say go even earlier. You don't have to. Many entrepreneurs reach out and say, I'm not looking for capital. I just want to have a discussion. That's fine too. We love to have those discussions early, since we want to get to know the teams very early as well.
Yeah. Can I maybe
Super
compliment?
Yes, please go ahead.
Compliment to that, because I think Jessica is very spot on here. Because from an investor's perspective, the longer you have a kind of relationship with the entrepreneur, and also the longer you can follow their progress and kind of verify later on whether what they have said in the early days of the business, whether that has sort of at least made sense or not. I mean, it serves as a very strong signal, a positive signal towards the investor in making the investment decision later on. And also it's kind of a way to mitigate the unconscious bias trap in a sense, because and this, I agree also that is kind of the phenomena that we really need to fight against here. But it's also a very difficult phenomena to fight against, because it's rarely that you can pinpoint a situation where, or investment decision or recruitment decision, that this has been affected by unconscious bias. And if you ask anyone, I mean, no one would admit that they are subject to this unconscious bias. But if you frame the question otherwise, that how much do you put weight on either investment decisions or recruitment decisions on the person's, let's say, experience and track record from a very narrow field versus looking at, let's say, potential and translatable experience, then it's maybe easier to admit, at least I can admit, that I have in the past, overweighted perhaps track record and experience in certain decisions. So coming back to the point that it is a way for the entrepreneur to get out of this trap, that they can, signal towards the investors along a longer period of time how they perform with the business. So that's why it's definitely recommendable to start the discussion early on.
That's excellent. Excellent points from you both, Juha and Jessica. Liva, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just want to add shortly to this getting to know each other early on, how important that is, and actually how that actually can help you hack the bias behavior that is going on. We are all as humans biased. We did a pilot project with a selection process of 140 startups to 10 startups being selected and shown presented for investors. And what was most interesting is what those that were not being selected were those that were unknown markets, problems, technologies, and founders to the people sitting in the selection board. So getting to know early on to not be in the unknown pool is very important. Thank you, Jessica and Juha, for pointing that out.
If I may, I would add to that that I believe that one of the roles of the government in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is creating those spaces for those to build those relationships, especially for the people who wouldn't have access to those relationships otherwise. So I think as a government, is one of the duties is creating those moments when these investors and women and all kind of entrepreneurs can at least get like that coffee, what we call kind of can we have a coffee? But what if you don't know that person to ask for the coffee? So I think that's one of the main roles of government in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, creating those spaces for everyone.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And Diana, kind of shifting to you. And first of all, I love this dynamic and please feel free to just pitch in on your thoughts because you have such rich experiences on this. And I think this is a very key aspect that is in demand from our audience for today. And Diana, you mentioned on that, and my question was going to be on the role of governments on this. And then creating those spaces. And I think that's also, I think that's very key, what you've mentioned. And just want to ask on that, I think, because one of the things that for women entrepreneurs is also being not in the network of those investors or such. So from your experience, Diana, what impact have you seen we in UNC have in the whole system of business owners and entrepreneurship and investors in New York from when you started, 5 years ago to now? And have been really mindful of creating more space around the table and ensuring that, those that might not have the access to ping someone for a coffee chat or even know how to do that, how has we NYC done that and kind of the difference from when you first started to now, half a decade later?
Yes, I think we have done two key things on that field. The first one is helping women to understand what is the moment to start the business and how unique they are. So hopefully trying to get like they are more successful like that. And our last impact report showed like 21% of the women going through our program moved their business stage. That means like the ones who were in pre-startup moved to a startup, and the ones who were in a startup moved to operating stages. So I think that's one of the impact that we have given to New York City, especially for women in underserved communities or those women who haven't started earlier, kind of guide them how they can navigate that business stage and advance on that. Now, with investors, I think, and excuse me if I don't pronounce your name well, but Huja, I think he made a very good point when with the question of like, how did you get to meet these women for your investments? And he said like it was through a program. Actually, it wasn't like more than intentional. It wasn't something as intentional as we would like to do. It was like through a program. So that's another thing that we have been trying to do with the initiative is create, and this, I think that also it's been a change in New York City across the board. Like investors now are more intentional in getting into these programs to meet like diverse entrepreneurs. So leaving aside the naive conception of, oh, we know diversity is important, we are going to find those diverse entrepreneurs. So it is more like, okay, we need a system. We need to create the space, but it is a space with a process and a system. So we ensure like we meet those diverse entrepreneurs with those diverse background, in this case, women. So I think that's also, I've seen the change in New York City, all the venture capitalists and funds saying like, okay, we are going to invest 20%, but how we invest that 20%, let's create a system, a feed, a program where we get those connections. So I think that's something that I've seen like not one or two is like across the board, many, not as much as we would like, we aren't there yet, but it's still seeing how more and more investment funds are getting into these programs intentionally.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, also to have this awareness on when women start their businesses, because what we've seen is that a lot of programs are done in relation to the universities. And the fact is that most women start their businesses way beyond university. So that is also an awareness point to, I mean, we totally agree to focus on education and the students when they educate themselves, but also to focus a lot later on and be aware that especially women start their businesses at a later age.
Yes, absolutely. And it also takes several efforts to get to that, of startup efforts to get to that successful business. And I think that what I'm loving and hearing here is that, you know, we while we see structural issues and problems, it's also being answered, as Diana and Liva and Stine and Jessica and Jua is saying, is that, you know, we're also responding to it in a structural way of, you know, like, for example, not leaving it to serendipity that, you know, you'll connect and meet up at some point. However, like Diana mentioned, you know, structuring those engagements, pulling in the investors, pulling in the women entrepreneurs and getting those networks together. I love that there's just this structure that has developed, because I feel like, you know, 10 years ago, it's a lot of this data and information, but now it's really seeing a lot of action, both on the investor side, from the governments, and entrepreneurs as well. So I think that's excellent. So shifting a little bit to Juha, is that the World Economic Forum has found Finland as the second best country in the world to close the gender gap to this date. And this data surprised me a bit, but very positive. 86.1 of the gender gap in Finland has been closed. What do you think has made Finland one of the most gender equal countries in the world, together with some of the other Nordic countries?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's a little bit two-sided. I'm not as such blindly optimistic about it as those statistics may seem like. But yeah, it is true that in Finland, if you look at the employment rate, you know, it's probably, I mean, women and men are very close to each other. So, and I guess that is just part of the Nordic societal model in a sense as well, that, you know, that has been so much embodied in the culture that both women and men typically go to work and build their own careers, etc. And also, if you look at, let's say, how families are arranging their, when they have younger kids, and how they sort of arrange their, let's say, daycare, and you know, which parent takes more responsibility out of it. It is not out of the question that, for instance, the father takes a, let's say, longer break from his job to take care of the children. But having said that, I still think there is kind of a segregation in a sense that you definitely see this kind of traditional women versus men's jobs, unfortunately. So women tend to be working in different sectors than men do. Finland is a very export-oriented or kind of heavy industry-oriented country. And also, if you look at technical universities, where I spent time already 20 years ago, I think it's still at like 20% of the students in technical universities, for instance, are only that percentage is women, which is, of course, kind of important proxy if you think about foundation of at least technology-enabled businesses. So I think it's a little bit two-sided issue, really.
No, thank you for that. I do recall, I many years ago went to Slush, the entrepreneurship conference, and a lot of dads were pushing strollers during that big, you know, conference, which was kind of like a concert as well. So it was quite interesting. Even the little ones had headphones to keep from the loud noise and music. But I did see that there was just, you know, just kind of society-wise a certain difference from how we do things in New York and how it was done in Finland and other Nordic countries. And so we go now to Liva and Stine. For the Diversity Commitment Initiative, what has been the reflections from the investors during that process? and formulating the common goals. And kind of a two-part to it is that what's needed for this initiative to succeed and create a lasting change from your perspective?
Thank you, Lauren. So first, we would dive into sort of the reflections from the investors. And I think our first point is to sort of give credit to the investors signing the diversity commitment, the first 8 investors. We're hoping that a lot more will come. And you said, why don't we all have this? So I think we will like to have that as well. And I think you and Jessica, we should definitely talk. This is not a Danish initiative. This is something that we would like to broaden out. But it was difficult in the beginning to get the first investors sort of to step into the ring. They all knew that something had to be done, but not exactly what and how. So taking the first steps is always difficult. Once that was done, it was easier to get the next ones aboard, and that's also what we see now. There's a big interest in joining. But one of the main reflection was to make goals that could actually be met, which we very much respect. So this was taken very seriously. And one of the goals now is to have maximum 80% homogeneity, which when you look at it from the outside, it might seem not too ambitious. But when you look at the starting point that only 5% of the VC funding goes to either female or mixed team, that is still quite a way to go. So it's ambitious, but we still think it's achievable, and the investors think that as well, which is even more important. And that was sort of one of the reflections, to make goals that when we are 3 years from now, they've actually met the goals. Then hopefully, and also what we expect is that we can raise the bar, and then from year to year we will raise the bar. But the goals that we have made now, it was very important for the investors that they could be met. Also, the goals are also, you were talking about deal flow, Jessica, and that is also was also one of the reflection. What can they actually affect themselves, and what is sort of out of their hands? And obviously, some things are easier to influence than others. So who you hire, for example, into your team, you have sort of, you maybe not fully control, but you have a very big control on who to hire. But who enters your deal flow is a bit more tricky. Still, you have influence on where are you present, who are you reaching out to, what are your key messages. So that has also been part of it. And that was more, there was more insecurity in the further the investors got away from where they have direct influence. Of course, it gets more difficult to know whether you can reach the goals. But the goals and the deal flow are, of course, interdependent. So they have both been written into the diversity commitment. And then we don't just have VC funds, we also have the public funds, so similar to a US organization in Finland. And we also have sort of a matchmaker organization. So for example, the Danish Business Angel Association. So obviously our organization have different sort of sizes, and they are very different in their nature. So how could they live up to these goals? And they also have different starting points. So that was also a reflection. How do we translate these goals into our everyday life? And we have been and are supporting on that, but they are also supporting each other on translating these goals. And so we are able to have comparable data. So the idea is that they will report once a year on the goals, and then hopefully after 3 years we are very close to what they've actually set up to achieve. So that is also a main reflection. How do we make this data comparable from various organizations?
And Lauren, you asked how can this initiative become successful? What is needed? Besides, I've shared it in the chat, so everyone listening in can read the goals if they're interested to dive into all the details. What we've put into the diversity commitment is this measure, track, and report yearly, but also sharing learnings publicly, so that learning on what to do and what works and what is best practice is shared faster. Before I talked about this committing community, it's just as much a learning community for the investors and matchmakers themselves. And then also they have all committed themselves to create an action plan on how they will reach their goal, how they will do that within their organization, since, as Stina mentioned, they're all quite different in their ways. And then also that they are all committed themselves to intentionally redesign work processes for diversity. So just as Jessica also mentioned, also within own organization, gender balance is part of, you know, how your own organization is, be the change you want to see, but also to like how you recruit startups, how you throughout every single step of your deal flow, how does that work? The questions you ask, as Jessica noted here early on, but all these simple steps, because our approach is we are all biased as human beings, and none of us are to be expected to come to work as the pure soul of Dalai Lama. We assume it's humans going to work. And so we have this more intentional design for diversity into the work processes approach with the investors. So they can have focus on what they do best is create value for their investors on the other hand. And then what we've also designed into that the goals can be adapted every year. So this, what you might say, entrepreneurial mindset. So based on what we learned year one, what can we then either add of other dimensions of diversity or adjust, build, measure, learn, as an entrepreneur would do? We're actually asking the investors to do the same as you would ask a startup to do. So these are some of the success criteria we've built into it, criteria that we've built into to enhance the likelihood of it to succeed. And then, of course, as we mentioned in the beginning, it is a structural issue. So we are looking for to making this a Nordic initiative to actually create that committing community across the Nordics, as well as investment cases are rarely only within one country. And then, of course, one thing is that we are seeking funding to do all this work to create value for the investors and the ecosystem as such, of course, also for those potentially getting the investments. So we ourselves are looking for funding to fund this initiative. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Liva. Thanks, Tina. And indeed, we all wish we could be the Dalai Lama, right? But we're striving. We strive for that. And you know, you mentioned really practical and actionable things that you're doing, which is excellent and in a very structural way. I'm curious if you have these as kind of tools and accessible learnings now, or that's something in the pipeline. I know we're getting a couple of comments of that's fantastic. You know, I want to, as an investor, learn how to do that, and you know, quick reference points on how I can incorporate that. It sounds good, but is there something that I can look at and just kind of try to do a checkpoint of my own investment deals, how I get pipelines, etc.? Would you have that available, and would the investors that are pinging us on the chats be able to access that, or it's something that's down the line?
So everyone is welcome to reach out. I can see Stina wants to join in here, so I'll leave you to the note.
Yeah, so the idea behind this community is that it's a learning community, as Liva said. So it's not like the investors sign and then they're just left on their own and we just have fingers crossed that everyone will succeed. We have seen similar initiatives where people sign and then you look at it after a year and how did it go? And it is like it is with everything else. When you make a commitment, you need follow-up. and we all need follow-up when we make a commitment, and that will be the same here. So we have monthly check-ins online with the investors. We have 4 quarterly meetups where we actually meet. The idea is sometimes to do it in the real world, but since it's been a COVID-19 year, it's been digital, but that's also been very positive because it's, for example, it means that we can meet up anywhere. And then we also offer tools, and some of them are tools that we have sort of ready at hand now, but other tools will be dependent on what the need will be along the way. And it will also be various for the different investors. And it can also be that some will crack one nut, but not the other. So we can share those learnings. And that's where Liva and I come in, because that's what we facilitate. So it's definitely a learning process. And then as a starting point, as Liva also mentioned in the beginning, we were co-writers of the report Return on Diversity. It's a guide. So in the end of that guide, tools both for the startup and the investors, that is sort of things you can do today. We can also share that in the chat, but that's also sort of very tangible things. And that's sort of our general approach, that this is not, it's something that you need to do on an everyday basis. So we built that in as well.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And I love the realisticness of, the goals and having that to be a snowball effect. I'm getting a ping that we are running a bit short on time, and we've got a ton of questions in the chats. So I'm going to go rather quickly. Pardon me if I talk really fast. But then, I've got a question for Diana and then Jessica really quickly. And if we can make that, a minute each, that would be great. Diana, the question to you, as you've been an entrepreneur and now supporting entrepreneurs in New York City. Can you share some of the experiences you have learned on your journey from being an entrepreneur to founding initiatives to support entrepreneurs? And I think we've touched on a few of that, but if you may have like 1 or 2 things that you'd like to particularly highlight, that would be wonderful. I think you're muted.
To me, I think we go back to creating those spaces. To me, what really made a difference was the mindset and how, for instance, I was socialized when I was growing up. I grew up surrounded by entrepreneurs. So for instance, to me, being an entrepreneur was the bomb. In my family, no one works for anyone else. I mean, so to me, the fact that was something that was motivated to me, and I thought like something great, helped me a lot and give me that mindset of dealing well with rejection. Like women, we need to understand those things that are difficult sometimes for us. Like it is okay, especially when you are looking for funding, you need to be totally fine, like no. I mean, if you are being a disruptor, obviously, I mean, the regular thing is that you are going to get 1,000 no's. Also, evolving like those skills of presenting in front of other people, even if they look different than me. I mean, it's like a muscle that you start, especially for women that are Black women entrepreneurs, that Latinas, all of that. They need to get comfortable around white male. I mean, we need that. I mean, men are still the ones who are investing in the world, so we need to get comfortable in those spaces. And I understand that unconscious bias, like, works both ways. I mean, it happens in that side of the table, but it also happens on your side of the table. So how you go over that. So I think that change of the fact that I was growing up in that environment helped me to see things differently and be a little bit more open to take risks and to be in places that I wasn't comfortable. So to me, and I'm trying to put that when I work with other entrepreneurs, because I think that's one of the main issues for women entrepreneurs. It is like we are equally or better prepared than men. We know very well our products, but then there are like those small gaps on those things of mindset, like sometimes hold us. Like we don't start early, we do things differently. So I think that's something that helped me, and I'm trying to put in my programs as an element besides all the other elements that are important for the entrepreneurship.
And I would say, Diana, I think that's a bit of the secret sauce of the success of you leading the program, because you're so intimately knowledgeable of those, nuances and gaps. And I think that's why it just attracts a lot of great programs and great entrepreneurs and investors as well. So thanks for all the amazing work that you're doing there. Last question. And I think given the time, if Victoria might allow us, since I see there's a lot of questions on the chats, I'll have one last question for Jessica, and then jump right into the Q&A that we've got on the chats rather than the fire round that we've got here. So one is, Jessica, you work in Sweden, but hold a very global perspective on the startup agenda. Based on both the Swedish and global perspective, and I think is a good one to close us out with, is what are some of the key items and the elements you look for in investments in 2021? So if the entrepreneurs that are on the line want to pitch to you, what would be, 2 or 3 things that you'd be looking for in investing in them? And what would that be that makes you say yes?
I am struggling. Do you hear me?
I can, yeah. We can hear you. Can you hear us? So it wouldn't be 2021 in Zoom if we don't have at least one hiccup. So we'll let Jessica give her a minute or two to get back to us. And in the meantime, Victoria, I think maybe we can jump into the Q&A session.
Yes,
There's
absolutely.
a ton there. You want me to start from the top?
Oh, yes, because there are
whichever you prefer.
There are quite a lot, and I believe we should start from the top. I've tried to make it more visible to you in one way or the other. And thank you everyone for submitting your questions. Please continue to do that. We have now around 17, 18 minutes left.
Yes. So
and if you just take it from the top, I think that would be great.
Okay, excellent. We will do that. And, if we don't get to your questions, we will get to it by email afterwards. But we're going to go round about, and any speaker that want to answer the question, just jump on in. Let me just go through this. Okay, so we've got a question from Wangari Kamau. Hey, Wangari, good to see you. Are any of the panelists looking to redirect their strategies to support women seeking to start own businesses given the pandemic? Many women left the workforce, and starting own businesses would lend flexibility they seek.
I don't know where she's from, but if she's in New York City, we are actually launching funds. I think it should be in the next couple of months that the city will be opening investment or funds specifically to lend for women to start businesses after the pandemic. So that's, for instance, one opportunity that it is opening. We are also, that's something that we have learned in NYC, and the stats are out there. The US is the country with most women leaving the workforce to be at home with the kids. The numbers are astonishing. So, and we see like the concept of need-based entrepreneurs has changed to someone that need to start a business because they have to, they don't have another option, to women that they have to do it because that's the best option to balance their lives. So we are working now a lot on opening those opportunities for them, and also offering all the guidance that is possible for them to work from home and to make those connections. So I think we will have those two things: support to start the businesses from the legal point, from all other points. There is some things coming up in New York City.
So thanks, Diana. And I see, yes, Jessica, you're back. So if I'll...
Yes, so sorry. My Wi-Fi just went down.
I don't even apologize anymore when that happens, because it's, we'll be back when connectivity comes back. The question is basically, as an investor, we've got a few women entrepreneurs here. What are like 2 or 3 things that you would say, yes, I definitely want to invest in that, and kind of key elements that you're looking for should they reach out to you for an investment?
So there are a couple of themes that we're really deep into and that we're looking at. So food is one. We think it's a massive market, a lot of innovation happening, penetration is accelerating. So everything food related is very interesting. Femtech is another one that we see, and I think that's also the increase of female entrepreneurship, that finally everything from fertility and hormones and IVF, holistic health is getting funded, and very interesting models coming up there. So that's also one thing we're looking deeply into. And then the new way of working. I think everything that can solve this new normal, if that is working remotely, how to collaborate in teams and so on, is also interesting. But then our most important thing for funding is teams. So I think if you have a strong team and you have a new idea, we're very open. We invest B2B, B2C, US, Europe, so very broad mandate. So I think, just reach out, and would love to have that discussion.
Excellent. And I think we've got also a question is like, when you say teams, one of the things, there's a lot of solo founders.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yes. I would say, well done for being able to do it on your own. It's very tough. And I had 2 co-founders. So first of all, it's not something that is hindering us in any way or so. When I say team, I mean the team you build around you. So that can be C-level, it can be, you're more team at every level. We have no problems with solo founders at all.
Excellent. Sounds good. Okay, now I'm gonna thank you for that, Jessica. Super helpful. I'm very pragmatic. And so now we're gonna go into questions. I'm gonna lump a few questions. One is, there's a lot of questions on biases, and I think we've talked about that a bit already. But just curious if many of the things we're getting is that it's a very male-dominated the VC community still, right?
Yeah.
And this is a lot of it. And how do we check our biases at the door, and the diversity, et cetera? And we talked about some very specific examples. But I'm also curious, maybe one of the things is, as you have like you're rating your entrepreneurs, are there, 1 or 2 other things, and how you're identifying people on your pipeline? Are there 1 or 2 other pragmatic things?
Yes,
that you
we
think?
actually have, we have a couple of learnings there. So after doing, I can recommend everyone to do the training. I think that was very insightful for all of us, and you have much more than you actually think. After doing that, we changed our whole communication on the website and on job specs. And I think that has been really interesting for us to see that just the tone and the words you use also track the different deal flow and also different applicants for your job specs. So that was one thing. Another thing is to be more proactive with your deal flow, not just sit and wait for entrepreneurs to reach you, but actually be proactive and reach out. I think that has also changed quite a lot for us. And then, as I said before, with I think how you track it. And what we've done internally is that we started tracking quite a lot, but we also changed the communication internally. And I think that's one of the most important topics here, is to change diversity to be something negative, but to talk more about the better performance of mixed team and diverse team. And I think that has changed the mindset of, we are investors, we want to make money for our LPs, but we do that by investing in, diverse perspectives and diversity on all levels. So I think we changed that, and that has slowly started to, generate better discussions, but also remove the bias towards having to have diversity just because. Actually, we want to have greater performance, and that's why we want to have diversity.
Exactly. And if we may say so, it's women are creating literally billion-dollar markets. And so from an investor perspective, it's actually missing out on that kind of investment.
Exactly.
No, that's great. And then the other, so we're going to jump around on the questions. One is, how do you seek the right mentor? And I think also another question within that is that, is it okay to have kind of a one shot, like I have a very specific question, doesn't have to be a long-term mentorship. What are your thoughts on that and seeking mentors and kind of the right type of mentors? Yes, please, Liva.
I've been
just jump in.
training at accelerator programs and training both the mentors and making these mentor-mentee matches. And yes, you can both have long terms. You can have short-term mentorship. You can have a structured mentorship where others facilitate it for you, or more kind of people you stumble upon and you are inspired by. And I think you do not necessarily need to have one mentor, because each mentor that I've met throughout my life that's been mentored me, or I've seen mentor others, they might mentor in regards to different topics. So you could say it's the extended team around you that's got your back of different people, that whether it's your leadership, your that balance of work and life, whether it's your business model, it's your sales interaction, all various topics on becoming the leader, the founder, the human being you want to be in life. There are different types of mentors. So a key quality would be, is it someone that inspires you and you want to learn from? Then reach out. And people are actually rather open, even if you reach out on LinkedIn. That's my experience. And also, hopefully we will meet each other in life or in digital events like this. Hook up with people, and with people that inspires you to do better in whatever aspects of life or business that you want to become better in. That's how the criteria for finding, and that it can be found anywhere, whether it's LinkedIn, digital session like that, or informal mentor programs. I'm sure that maybe even Diana have setups for that, as she said, structures. So that can be found in many different places.
And I just want to, sorry, thanks, Liva. I just want to add to that, because I would also just say ask, because I would say a very positive surprise in being an entrepreneur is how often people say yes. And also people that you thought sort of was unachievable or too busy to help. I would say people almost always say yes. And if you get a no, it's because their plate is full. So reach out will be my advice. It's that's most often a very positive experience.
Absolutely. There's definitely more yes than no. Thank you for that. We have a question of how do we get more of the male investors around the table, since they are still, the majority of the investors. What are your thoughts on that? And I know Liva and Stina, you guys are doing a lot of that, but any other kind of thoughts on that, on crowding in investors, male investors?
I think it's such an important question, and I think this tends to be a discussion between females, investors and entrepreneurs about female issues that we're not taken seriously, or that we're underrepresented. So what I like is that we need to involve men in this question, and it's so important that this is a broader question. So we as female investors or female entrepreneurs don't have to do the change ourselves. I think this is a general issue, and I think it's so good to see the initiatives that have happened. But I think one thing that we discussed before and that I like is that we need to showcase the solutions. I often hear in the investor community that, yes, we know the issues, we want to solve them. How? So I think if we can share those learnings, if we can go out and say, we know that it is an issue. We've already stated that for the last 10 years or so. And here is what you can do and what you can do to change it. I think that would actually be a very positive reaction and something that most funds want to do. But I want to make sure that we have more men in the discussion and we talk more about this as, the performance is better. So you also want to join this discussion. But it's very difficult and it's quite frustrating, I think, for most of us that we just miss the men in this discussion.
Yeah, and one of the questions here is actually, agree on the conscious bias training is important. However, what are tips on how to best offer this training to investors, particularly for those who may not be aware of your biases affecting their decisions? So you're already in bias, but you're also like, I don't even know I'm biased, and I don't even want to admit I have biases. You know, it's kind of like that hard to reach group. What are your thoughts on that, on how to engage those types of investors?
If I may, I mean, one obvious thing that we have done in this front is if the question is really between the entrepreneurs and the VCs that there's bias, then as Jessica pointed out, and congratulations for reaching kind of gender parity in your partnership. We are by the way, investors in the fund, so even happier. I guess the industry average is around 15% if you look at partnership level. In my investment team, it's 25% with the newest edition, so there's still a long way to go. But I mean, if I now speak on behalf of our LP investment team, so the team that does investment decisions in terms of which VCs to back, so it's very much embodied in the discussion in all layers of the organization that if they come with an investment proposal for an all-male VC team, they will be, you know, given some tough questions, and they know that, and they take into account in their own due diligence. So when they kind of had the discussions with the investment teams, I mean, it's definitely on the top of the agenda to address the issue of how the balance within the partnership works out.
And Lauren, if I may say, how do you, have more men join the conversation? Invite them, include them. I mean, we are sitting about talking about creating safe spaces for women to enter and just have this inclusive culture. And that's often part of the conversation. If you want men to join in on this topic, be inclusive in your approach, and create those safe spaces where you can have the conversation about being insecure about what to do about this. And am I allowed to speak now because I'm a man? And yeah, you are. Unintentionally, we've designed for monoculture. How do we intentionally design for diversity? And have that instead of an approach of shame and blame and somewhat anger and frustration, which I totally understand for a lot of people, is to more get to that point where it's about a matter of role and responsibility as humans, as whatever role and responsibility you have within your investment fund or a society or what may not be. So just like women wants to be approached as humans, so does men. That's
word of wise. Yes, thank you, Levi. That's excellent. Thank you for that. I know we've got 2 minutes before the close of this event. And apologies if we weren't able to get to all your questions. One last one I'll squeeze in there before going to the final comments, and then back to Victoria to close this out, is that, we've got different organizations that are on the line. So for example, they work with, they have community development financial institutions that work with entrepreneurs, and they want to kind of, be able to link up those entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, with you as investors, down the line. How do they work with you? And then also corporate philanthropy. And we've got Diana here, so governments, et cetera. Are there other ways? How can they start working with you on this, and how do they approach you about it? And that'll be our last question for today.
So maybe I start then, and you can chip in. But we do that quite a lot, and since we have offices in both in Europe, in several countries, but also in the US, we have those partnerships and we do that work. So I would just say reach out. I have a partner that is head of a platform, and that is exactly her role, to make sure that we're very active in the community. So I would say, just email us, and we would love to do those partnerships, and we do them quite a lot already.
Yes, I can also confirm.
Excellent. Diana, did you have something you wanted to add in?
I would say for the entrepreneurs of women entrepreneurs in New York City, they should consider to join the We Master Money funding program. The program basically is like the first step to get funded, which is raising awareness of alternative sources of funding, because investment funds aren't the answer for all women entrepreneurs. So in terms of what else is out there and what is more friendly for women in different business stages, that's something that I suggest to the audience to check out in our website.
Excellent. I wish we had more time. But thank you so much to each of you and the amazing speakers. It's really an honor to spend this time with each of you. And also thank you to all the questions, excellent questions. And there's even a pile of still more. So we'll be sending those to the speakers and revert back to you once we get a chance. So just a few words to close us out before I hand it over to Victoria. So no doubt that there's definitely gaps that exist, but I hope, that same as you feel the same as I do, that there is a paradigm shift. There is, structural changes, as there are, indeed structural challenges. There are structural solutions that, our speakers are working on at different levels. And so that really makes me feel better. Starts off my day in a very bright light. So thank you for all of those. I think one of the things that I had noted is there's, one of the co-founders of the $1 billion fund for women had noted that, yes, indeed, we've got about 4% of all unicorns are women owned, which is frankly quite astonishing given that we're in the single digits, so most 2% to get the funding, right? So can you imagine if women did actually get much more funding and how many more unicorns are out there? Women founders are creating these $1 billion markets. And recent examples are also New York City based, like Glossier, which I'm using today, and then also Rent the Runway, which I also often use. And so my hope and expectations are that investors and frankly will and frankly should invest more in women. And after all, as stated by venture capitalist James VC, when we shared earlier, is women are an underlooked asset class that is overperforming and frankly, indeed creating $1 billion markets. And on that note, I hand it over to Victoria for the final words for today. And thank you all for your engagement and just, really frankly, just the bright light to my day to hear all these solutions that we've come upon that you're doing. And really bravo to each of you for the work that you're doing. And bravo to all the audience that we've got today on especially the entrepreneurs and investors that's on the line as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much, everyone. I know we have gone a little bit over time, but that's how it is when you're in good company and have a good, important discussion. Thank you so much, every one of you, both those who are listening in and Lauren for your amazing job as a moderator. If everything goes wrong, I'll definitely hire you as moderator for everything, even my wedding that's coming up soon. No, thank you everyone to join today. We'll have the next webinar on May 25th, same time. Everyone who has joined today will get a link so you can sign up if you're interested, where we'll focus a little bit more on the corporate side and the corporate outlook when we discuss diversity in teams and gender equality. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.